The room went still the moment she walked in, not because she made a scene, not because she said a word. It was the way Nathaniel Graves, the 58-year-old senior partner of Ashwell and Graves Property Group, stopped mid-sentence and looked at her. The way a man looks when he suddenly understands that he has made a catastrophic mistake. Zinnia Ashwell Crane, 37 years old, stood at the entrance of the 42nd floor boardroom in a charcoal wool dress she had owned for 6 years. No jewelry except the simple gold band she had stopped wearing 3 months ago and quietly placed in the top drawer of her desk. Her dark hair was pulled back the way she always wore it on days when she needed to think clearly. She was carrying a single manila folder. The folder was thin. It didn't need to be thick. She set it on the table without opening it, pulled out the chair at the head of the table. The chair her late father had sat in for 31 years, and sat down. No one in that room had seen her do that before. Not once in the 4 years since her father passed. Not once in the 18 months since she and Brennan Crane had signed the marriage certificate in a courthouse downtown with 2 witnesses and a judge who kept mispronouncing her last name. Not once. And yet she sat there like she had always been meant to sit there. Because she had met Brennan Crane at a property conference in Atlanta. He was 39 at the time, loud in the way that men who've built something from nothing tend to be. Not obnoxiously loud, but confidently loud, the kind of voice that fills the space before the person does. He was a regional acquisitions director for a mid-size firm out of Charlotte, and he had a way of explaining commercial real estate, like he was letting you in on something everyone else had missed. Elara Ashwell. She was still Elara Ashwell then, before she became Elara Ashwell Crane, and then, quietly, just Elara again in the privacy of her own thoughts, had been standing near the back of the room during his panel. She remembered thinking his presentation was competent, not brilliant, competent. She had not introduced herself that evening. She had listened, evaluated, and gone back to her hotel room. He had found her the next morning at the coffee station near the registration desk. "You were in the back row during my session," he said. "You didn't applaud at the end." "I don't applaud presentations," she said. "I take notes." He smiled. She remembered that smile, wide, uncalculated, the kind of smile that came before the person had time to decide whether to perform it. They had talked for 40 minutes. He didn't ask her what she did. She didn't tell him. By the 3rd date, she had realized she was falling for him. By the 5th, she had started wondering whether she should tell him about Ashwell. Not Ashwell and Graves Property Group, the company his own firm had once tried to acquire a partnership stake in, back when her father was still alive and firmly unwilling. Just the name. Just the fact that she owned it. She didn't, not because she was hiding it. Or that's what she told herself. She told herself she wanted to be known without the company first. She had spent her entire adult life being referred to in 3 ways. Marcus Ashwell's daughter, the Ashwell heiress, and the woman who inherited the firm. She wanted, just once, to be someone a man chose without knowing any of that. So she let him choose her without knowing, and he did. He chose her, and she believed it. They were married 14 months after Atlanta. He took a position at Ashwell and Graves as Director of Mid-Atlantic Acquisitions, a role that was genuinely his, earned through a real interview process she had recused herself from entirely. She had been careful about that, meticulous even. She thought that was enough. The first time she felt something shift was not dramatic. It didn't announce itself the way betrayal does in movies. No door slamming, no raised voices, no lipstick on a collar left carelessly where she could find it. It was a Tuesday evening in March. Brennan was working late, which he did often, and Elara was reviewing quarterly land acquisition reports at the kitchen table when she noticed that 2 of the parcels flagged in the southeast corridor. Parcels she had personally been monitoring for 18 months had been moved into a different review category. Not rejected, not approved, just quietly reclassified into a track that effectively stalled them for another 2 quarters. She thought it was an administrative error. She sent a note to her operations manager, Theodora Breck, 51-year-old head of internal property review, asking for clarification. Theodora's response came the next morning. 6 words. Brennan flagged them. He has authority. She had given it to him. A mid-level acquisition authority, the standard grant for a director of his rank. Enough to expedite small approvals. Not enough technically to reclassify corridor-level strategic parcels without a senior review sign-off. But it had happened and nobody had flagged it. Elara closed the email. She sat with her coffee and looked out the window of the apartment they shared. Her apartment, technically, the one she had owned since 32. And she thought about the 6 words Theodora had written. She thought about them for a long time. She did not ask Brennan about it that evening. She made dinner. She asked about his day. He told her about a deal he was pulling together in Raleigh, enthusiastic in the way he always was about things he believed in. She listened and nodded and laughed at the right moments. She was thinking about the parcels the entire time. The next morning, she called her attorney, Whitfield Okafor, 53-year-old founding partner of Okafor Legal in downtown Richmond, and asked him to quietly begin a documentation review on all acquisition decisions touching Brennan's portfolio over the last 8 months. She said she wasn't certain what she was looking for. Whitfield said that was fine. He'd looked for uncertain things before. It took 6 weeks. What Whitfield found was not embezzlement. It was subtler than that, and in some ways worse. Over 14 months, Brennan had been systematically cultivating relationships with 3 external investors, men Alara had never been introduced to, men who did not appear in any Ashwell and Graves documentation, men whose names surfaced only in a chain of personal emails. Brennan had sent from a secondary account he apparently did not realize was still routed through an Ashwell server. He had been positioning himself, not to steal from the company, to acquire a piece of it, to build quietly and patiently an investor coalition that would allow him to propose a restructuring of Ashwell and Graves, one that would install him as co-principal and dilute the founder family stake enough that Alara's controlling share would become a matter of negotiation rather than absolute fact. He had been doing this for over a year. He had been doing it while sleeping in the same bed as the woman who owned every door in the building he walked into every morning. Whitfield sent the documentation over on a Thursday afternoon in a file marked simply, "Review complete." Alara read through it twice. Then she went to her closet, changed into her running shoes, and ran 7 miles along the river trail behind their building. She didn't listen to music. She didn't take her phone. She ran until the anger settled into something harder and quieter, something she recognized from the months after her father died. And she had stood in front of the entire company at 33 and told them she was not going to sell. She had been underestimated before. She knew what to do with it. There was a woman named Priscilla Dunmore, not Priscilla from the files, not anyone Alara had known before. A 34-year-old junior analyst who had joined Ashwell and Graves 11 months ago from a competing firm. She was bright and methodical, and Alara had noticed in a performance review, slightly overlooked for someone with her output. She was also, as Whitfield's review had uncovered, one of 3 people in the building Brennan had been particularly attentive to, not romantically, or not primarily, strategically. He had been cultivating her as a future ally, sharing information with her that was slightly above her clearance level, flattering her professionally in ways designed to build loyalty. Priscilla Dunmore did not know she was being cultivated. Alara could have left her out of everything. She almost did, but she found herself thinking about Theodora Breck's email, 6 words, calm, matter of fact. And she thought about how many people in that building had accepted Brennan's authority as a given without ever asking where it had come from. She thought about her own father, who had spent 31 years building something and had trusted it to her, not because she was his daughter, but because she was ready. She called Priscilla Dunmore into a meeting on a Friday afternoon in late May. Priscilla sat down across from her, looking composed and slightly uncertain. "I want to ask you something," Alara said, "and I want you to answer honestly, even if you think the honest answer might be complicated." Priscilla said she would try. "When Director Crane discusses company strategy with you, and I believe he does, fairly regularly, does he ask you questions about the founding family's ownership structure?" There was a pause, not a guilty pause, a careful one. "He's asked how the equity was divided after your father passed," Priscilla said. "I told him I didn't know the specifics." "That was the right answer," Alara said. "Because you don't know the specifics. Very few people do." She did not tell Priscilla what she knew. She did not explain what was coming. She simply thanked her, told her that her 3-year performance trajectory put her on track for senior analyst consideration, and said she hoped Priscilla would continue to come directly to her with any questions about her career at Ashwell. Priscilla left looking more uncertain than when she came in, but she left. Brennan came home that evening with takeout from the Thai place on Carey Street that Alara liked. He poured wine. He asked about her day. "Long," she said. "Anything interesting? A few things." She watched him move around the kitchen the way she had watched him for the last 2.5 years. He was comfortable here. He had always been comfortable here, in this apartment, in this city, in the company that bore her family's name. She had thought that was a good thing. She had mistaken comfort for contentment, and she had mistaken both for love. She ate her dinner. She laughed twice. She went to bed before him and lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and thought about her father. Marcus Ashwell had built a real estate group from a single commercial property in 1987. He had taken it public in 2003. By the time he died, the company's asset portfolio was valued at just under $400 million. He had left it entirely to Elora, not because her younger brother Sawyer was incapable, Sawyer was, in fact, brilliant, but because Elara had wanted it. Sawyer was a musician living in Portland and happy to be so. Elara had wanted the company the way some people want a language, not as a tool, but as a part of how they understood the world. She thought about what her father would have made of Brennan. She thought she already knew. She closed her eyes and slept 5 hours and woke up before her alarm and got to the office at 6:15. The board meeting had been on the calendar for 8 weeks. Quarterly review, Southeast Corridor strategic plan, Q3 projections, routine. The kind of meeting that generated 300 pages of preparation documents and lasted 4 hours and changed very little. Elara had been running these meetings for 4 years. She attended them the same way she attended everything: early, prepared, unhurried. She had asked Whitfield to attend this one. She had also asked Nathaniel Graves to ensure that all 12 board members were present, in person, no proxy attendance. She had not explained why. Nathaniel had asked once. She said she needed full quorum for a governance matter. He hadn't pushed further. He had known her father long enough to know that when an Ashwell said governance matter in that particular tone, the appropriate response was to make the calls. Brennan arrived at 8:47, 13 minutes before the scheduled start. He was wearing the dark blue suit she had bought him for their first anniversary. He set his portfolio on the table, 2 seats to the left of the head chair, his usual spot. He did not notice that the head chair was empty. He did not notice because he had never seen it occupied, not in his entire time at Ashwell and Graves. Elara had always sat 1 seat down and to the right, a habit she'd developed as a teenager sitting beside her father in these same meetings. A courtesy, a deference to the weight of the chair. She had never needed the chair to have authority, but today she needed people to see it clearly. She walked in at 8:59. Theodora Breck looked up and said nothing. Nathaniel Graves said nothing. 2 of the board members she didn't know as well exchanged a look she caught and filed away. Brennan looked up from his phone. He smiled. She didn't return it. She pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down. His smile didn't disappear immediately. It took 3 seconds, she counted, for his face to rearrange itself into something she had never seen on him before. A stillness. The kind a person gets when the floor beneath them shifts and they're not yet sure whether to grab something. She opened the manila folder. "Before we begin the quarterly review," she said, "I'd like to address a governance matter." The room was completely quiet. She laid out what she knew without editorializing. No emotion in her voice. Not anger, not satisfaction. Just facts presented in sequence with documentation, the reclassified parcels, the secondary email account, the investor conversations, the restructuring proposal he had been quietly circulating among people who did not work at Ashwell and Graves and who had no standing to receive it. She presented all of it in 9 minutes. When she finished, she closed the folder and placed her hands flat on the table. "I want to be clear," she said, "that this is not a personnel matter being brought to the board. This is an ownership matter. Ashwell and Graves Property Group was founded by my father in 1987. My controlling stake is 63%. This morning, upon advice of counsel, I have formally revoked the mid-level acquisition authority previously extended to Brennan Crane, effective immediately. I am also providing notice that Director Crane's employment contract is being terminated for cause under Section 14 of his agreement, which covers material conflicts of interest and unauthorized third-party disclosure of proprietary strategy." She paused. "These actions are within my sole authority as controlling principal. I am presenting them to the board as a matter of transparency, not as a request for approval." Brennan's chair scraped back 1/2 inch. "Not enough to stand, just enough to signal the impulse. Elara, you'll have the opportunity to speak with Whitfield Okafor directly," she said. "He's in the conference room on 41. She turned to the rest of the table. "Can we move to the quarterly review? I believe the Southeast Corridor projections are first." He came to find her afterward. She had expected that. He came to the smaller office she used for private calls, the one with the window overlooking the river, and he knocked once and opened the door before she answered, which was something he had always done and which had never bothered her until right now. "You could have talked to me," he said. His voice was controlled. She recognized the control. It was the same control he used in negotiation rooms, the calm that came from believing you still had moves left. "I did talk to you," she said, "for 2.5 years, about the company, about what you, Elara, I didn't know. I know you didn't." She turned from the window to face him. "That's not the issue. The issue is what you did once you were here and what you were planning to do with a company you had no claim to." He was quiet for a moment. "Then you never told me you owned it." "No," she said. "I didn't." "Was that fair?" he asked. And there was something in his voice that was different now. Not manipulation, not calculation. Something younger, something that might have actually been hurt. She had thought about this. She had thought about it many times in the last 6 weeks, and she had not arrived at an easy answer, and she was not going to pretend she had. Probably not entirely, she said. I made a choice that wasn't fair to you, and I've had to sit with that. He looked at her. But Brennan, what you were building, what you were trying to take, that wasn't a response to being misled. That was something you decided to do. She picked up her phone from the desk, a small, steady motion. You were doing it before you would have had any reason to feel misled. He didn't answer that. The parcel reclassifications had started 8 months into their marriage. The secondary email account had been opened 10 months in. The first investor conversation was dated 11 months after the wedding. He had started before he would have had any reason to feel wronged. She had checked the dates many times. She had needed to be sure. You should go talk to Whitfield, she said quietly. He's fair. He'll give you the room to review everything. He stood for a moment longer, and she waited, and then he left. She turned back to the window. The river was low and brown and flat in the August heat, and a single sculling boat moved along it with that particular stillness of something going fast from far away. She stayed at the window for a long time. Tilda Brennan, 62-year-old mother of Brennan Crane, called Elara 3 days later. Elara answered. I don't know the details, Tilda said. You don't need to, Elara said. He's my son. I know. There was a long pause. He always liked that you were strong, Tilda said eventually. He told me that once. After you first got married, he said, she's stronger than she looks. I always remembered that. Elara sat with that for a moment. I know he did, she said. She didn't know what else to say, and neither did Tilda, and eventually they said goodbye and hung up. She filed the call away in a part of herself she was going to have to return to later. Not now. Now there were southeast corridor projections and a board to reassure and 14 senior staff members who needed to see that the company was steady. That was the thing her father had taught her. The company had to be steady. The people inside it needed to believe in the ground under their feet. That was the first job. Everything else was second. 6 weeks after the board meeting, Elara had lunch with Priscilla Dunmore in the small cafe on the ground floor of the building. Priscilla had been promoted to senior analyst 2 weeks prior. The promotion had been in motion since the spring, nothing to do with any of this. They talked about a land acquisition in Greensboro that Priscilla had flagged in a report. They talked about the data model she had been developing for corridor-level risk projections. It was a good lunch. The kind where you leave feeling like your time was well spent. At the end, Priscilla said quietly, without looking up from her coffee, I think I understand a bit more now about what you were asking me in May. Elara said nothing. I appreciate that you didn't explain it, Priscilla said. I think I needed to figure it out myself. You did, Elara said. Priscilla nodded and gathered her things. Elara stayed at the table for a few minutes after she left. She finished her coffee. She looked out through the glass doors at the lobby, the marble floor her father had chosen in 1994, the lettering above the entrance that still read Ashwell and Graves in the same serif font from the original building. She thought about changing the sign, just to Ashwell. She had thought about it before, actually, years before any of this. She decided, sitting there with her empty coffee cup, that she would, not out of anger, not as a statement about Brennan, or about marriage, or about any of it, just because it was her name. It had always been her name, and the building had always been hers. She set her cup down, stood up, and walked back through the lobby to the elevator. She pressed 42. The doors closed. She was already thinking about Greensboro.